So I got to credit the original creator of the more generic model on that site. Also, huge shout out to my brother for helping me get more comfortable with the 3D modeling software and teaching me shortcuts, etc., and also assisting with the final assembly of the contraption. And next, the makerspace I did the work at a local university in my hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. And finally, Klamas for correcting my poor dunny grammar. And I used a number of different pieces of software, including Mystery Exile itself, to create the source files for all of the parts. And also quite a few pieces of equipment and materials. My personal favorite being that last one, Squeefer, gathered humanely, of course. And so we move on to part one of the development process, which I call the 10 rings, no Marvel Cinematic Universe reference intended. So these were the non-dunny rings I started with regular Arabic numerals 0 through 9 on each one. And I immediately ran into complication number 1, which was that, well, the original, as I said, had 0 through 9. The dunny 0 has this little tiny dot that would be virtually impossible to print as a tiny 3D model detail on that scale. So my solution to that was to get rid of it and substitute a dunny 10, since that's also a single character in that numbering system. So once that complication was complete, I could actually start making the numerals. So first I went into Inkscape, which is my preferred vector graphic software, which for anyone who just doesn't know what vector means, it just means that it's a format that can be scaled larger or smaller without distorting anything. And Dunny font is, of course, Cyan's official font for Dunny letters and numbers. So I typed those out in Inkscape. Converted to vector or scalable shapes, and you'll notice a red asterisk there, which will be returned to in just a second. Saved as a vector graphic file, and imported it into Blender, which is my preferred open source and free, same as Inkscape is, but for 3D modeling. And remember that red asterisk a second ago? That's complication number 2. Dunny font does not play nice with Inkscape. Basically, when I export from anything using Dunny font data and try to import it into another software, in this case Blender, it shows up distorted. Go back one second. In this case, it was like partially missing and partially inverted. Just not what it's supposed to look like at all. So the solution to that was to export the numerals as a non-vector or PNG image file in this case, which would not anymore include the original font data. Then import that back into Inkscape and use an automated tracing function to recreate it as a vector without any connection to the original font file. And then save that as a new vector graphic and import back into Blender, and then it worked. Now that it had no direct data connection to the font. So once that worked, then I had to convert it to a 3D material and extrude it, as shown in this animation here, to be 3D numerals. And then I had to align each numeral with the corresponding side of the ring for the cryptics. Finally, or next, to finalize the ring, I had to, as shown in this animation, align it in 10 different orientations, varying by 36 degrees, so that I'd have all 10 rings as possible answers for digits in the cryptic solution, depending on the position of the numerals, which that inner groove on the inside of the ring is where the correct digit for that ring in the combination got aligned. Of course, I'm not going to tell you what the correct combination is, but that's how it looks on the inside. Then I just made a tiny tweak to the X and Y dimensions on each finished ring based on a suggestion on the original listing for the generic model. And then I had finished 10 dunny rings. And moved on to part 2, which was what I call a cursor on the cover, as you'll see in just a moment. The original cover piece, which is the piece indicating where to line up the correct digits in the combination on the finished cryptics, it just had this boring line indicating where to line them up originally. So I removed that line manually and got to work with something to replace it, a 3D Mystery Exile cursor. So the first step in that was using Reveal, which is a unofficial but very effective tool powered by Java. It's a Java application in Windows that extracts data from pretty much any Cyan game. I'm not sure about the most recent Myst, but any of the older versions of any Cyan game and other compatible games as well. It'll extract data. In this case, I just checked the one that includes pictures, and it'll just extract the whole data in that category to the folder you choose on your computer. Excuse me, on your computer. So then I located the basic cursor in the game files and opened it in GIMP, which is my preferred open source and free non-vector drawing software. And noticed how tiny it was, because that middle part was the actual size relative to the computer screen. And that brought me to complication number 3. When I tried to truly scale it up, it just got real blurry because it was not meant to be viewed in a big size. But I had an idea to get around that. Instead of scaling, I zoomed in 4,500%. And so I was just viewing the individual pixels at a large size. And then I replaced all the non-black colors, so all the flesh tones and green background, with white to make it a simple shape, and took a screenshot since I couldn't truly enlarge it, as I said, and pasted the screenshot back into a new GIMP document and exported that as a non-vector graphic so that I could import that into the vector software and use that automatic tracing function again to remove the background and create a vector shape of that cursor. Then I saved the vector graphic, imported it into the 3D Blender software, and converted it into a 3D object to then extrude like I did with the numerals, as shown in this animation. Then I just positioned it in the correct side of the cover piece where that line used to be, aligned with that shallow inner groove so that it's in the right place on the finished device. And then that was that. When you see it later in person, you will notice that the hand on the finished product, the cursor is sort of engraved rather than raised, that's because it sort of broke off a little bit, but it ended up looking like it was engraved instead, and I decided that looked cool, so I just left it that way. And so I moved on to part 3, fitting the flash drive. This animation illustrates how the dimensions on the original source model of the inner casing for the flash drive was designed for the original designer's flash drive dimensions. So with some help from my brother, we measured my flash drive that I was using and adjusted the inner dimensions to fit that. And then we carefully pried off the original casing from the flash drive and used this super glue to put the innards of it into the new casing. And this was my first attempt at holding the two halves of the casing in place while the glue dried over the flash drive part. Notice I say first attempt, because that was complication number 4. The two halves on the first attempt dried unevenly. I guess it needed the human touch to hold it even, which my brother was nice enough to provide on the second and successful attempt. While the glue set, and then it was good to go. And I moved on to part 4, final assembly of the cryptics. This was the piece that the source files refer to as the inner jacket, which is essentially the core of the cryptics. The rings and cover go over it, and then the flash drive slides in through it and locks in place when you scramble the combination. So this is basically a hollow core of it. And then that brought me to complication number 5 as soon as I started working with that printed piece. The inner jacket prongs break really easily when I attempt to put the other pieces over them because they were brittle at room temperature. But I say at room temperature because the solution was to buy a hair blow dryers specifically for the purpose of heating them enough to make them temporarily flexible to fit those pieces over it. And yes, as I said, I did buy the dryer specifically for this project. And then complication number 6 was immediately after that. The cover piece was too loose over the prongs and was spinning just as easily as the rings, so it was really not indicating anything. That cursor could be pointing anywhere. But we solved that, my brother and I, by putting a little of this second type of glue called E6000 on the tip of each prong before putting on the cover piece, and then held that in place briefly, and then it stayed put. So that was one of the relatively easier complications to solve at that point, thankfully. And then I got to a part that I call laser tag, which is a play on words because it was the laser cut and engraved tag with the dunny riddle. Get it? Laser tag. Okay, I thought it was funny. So in Inkscape, once again, I typed the riddle with dunny font and ran into complication number 7. My dunny grammar needs work. Clummus to the rescue. Once that was sorted out and corrected, I converted the text to vector shapes, and then I drew the border line and the line of the hole for the tag as basic lines in the software and saved it as a vector graphic once more. Then at this point, the directions would vary if you were to do it with a different laser cutting setup, but with the equipment I used at the makerspace in my town, this was my steps for this part. First of all, in the Corel Draw on the makerspace computer, I imported the vector graphic file of the finished design and ran into a recurrence of complication number 2. Remember how I said dunny font doesn't play nice with Inkscape? I don't have a screenshot of this one, unfortunately, but basically the points in the dunny letters were skewed all over the document and random looking directions. Didn't look anything like writing in any language at all. So the distortion was a big mess, but long story short, the workaround was the same as the first time I had that problem, just with letters this time instead of numbers. And then I just had to set the border and inner circle lines to a setting called hairline, which is so that the laser cutter would know to cut rather than engrave on those lines, whereas it would engrave the rest of it or the letters, and then send it to the Epilogue laser cutter's own software, where I just had to set so tell it what material and dimensions of the material and things like that, and the desired depth of the engraved characters, which I made a little deeper than the default so they'd be easy to read, and then finally sent it to the laser cutter and had complication number 8. It came out way too big because I messed up the measurements the first time. It was about 4 times the size of the Cryptics. So I just redid it at the proper size and moved on to the bonus content, which I haven't revealed yet. A couple of parts of that. First of all the source files are on the flash drive for the dunny version of the Cryptics, including all 10 possible digit combination rings, and as also including some reminders if you were to do it yourself with these files, and a copy of the tag design in the Corel format. But that's not the only thing on the flash drive. I also included a unique printable puzzle that is not one of the ones in the Mysterium activity books. This one's never been seen, and it's a different design that I came up with myself. The winner of the Cryptics from the prize table this weekend will have exclusive first access to try to solve that puzzle after they solve the Cryptics, that is. And I just ask that that person please contact me after they've solved all of it, because then I would like to share, eventually after they've had first dibs, I'd like to share the printable puzzle with others. And my contact info is also included in a file on the drive for that purpose. And so in conclusion, I have a few final statements. Again, I will be putting this device on the prize table following this presentation. And I just ask that everyone please leave it in the clear display box I have it in, so that the winner gets first dibs trying to solve it. Any questions? I think we have a stream question. Oh, yeah.
So this question is from Sporks. When replacing the casing, was there any concern regarding the internal components overheating, or did the electronic components of thumb drives just not generate enough heat for that to have been an issue?
I'm honestly not an expert on that, but it was never mentioned as an issue in the original design notes of the non-dunny version, and I have no personal reason to believe that that would be an issue to the best of my knowledge.
That's all I'm seeing for questions right now, but I just want to relay to you that you're getting a lot of compliments and people saying that it looks really good.
Thank you. Did you have a question? Okay. Thank you.